Welcome back, everyone. All right, well, welcome to our last session of the day. So the session is called Digital Organizing for Intersectional Queer Communities. Before we begin the session, another reminder that if you are currently in the lobby, to click the join button below or next to the session. It will be able to access the session chat and utilize the Q&A function to submit your questions to the speakers as well. So feel free to go ahead and drop your questions in during the presentation, and we'll get to them either during the presentation or at the end. And also don't forget to check out our expo area after the event. We'll be open in the expo until 6 p.m. Eastern, so it'll be open for another hour after this session wraps up. So today's presenter is Alyssa Azal. Alyssa is the founder of Queer Latines, a social organization for LGBTQ plus Latines and allies. She spent her career leading global DEI programs in big tech before exiting corporate to do work for her community. Now she runs Queer Latines, speaks, writes, and helps entrepreneurs and creatives scale their ideas through online storytelling. As an unfiltered eldest daughter from New York, she's the person people call when they need actionable advice and a plan. So I'm very excited to introduce Alyssa. Hi, welcome.
All right. Hello, hello. Thanks for the intro, Kristen. How's everybody doing today? Awesome. Let me see if I have access to the chat. Please feel free to put questions, comments, everything in the chat. I assume Kristen already gave an intro of who I am, so I'm happy to just get right into the presentation. But I'm so happy to be back with Paths. For those that don't know me, my name is Alyssa. I use she, her, age pronouns. I'm the founder of Queer Latines, amongst many other things, perhaps too many things, but I think that's what works for my brain. In order for me to do anything, I need to have 5 things on my plate at once. But I'm super excited for today's presentation. I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see. Content only. I'm not sure if folks are able to see this. Hold on. In terms of I mentioned having 5 things on my plate at all times. That also means having 50 tabs open at once. Okay. Give me one moment. I just need to change my computer settings in order to share my screen. And let's see if that works. Okay, perfect. Yay. Okay. Just give a thumbs up in the chat if you're able to see the presentation. Okay, fabulous. So before I get started, I want to give a preface, although I think some of my peers and creatives would say not to give a preface before you do some work. I was in corporate for 8 years before deciding to pivot and live a multi-passionate life and organize. And one of the things I've decided is when I do presentations, I'm not going to spend time designing the slides, because I think what's more important is the content that we hear and what we learn, rather than spending time, especially in the world of AI, just making the most beautiful slides. So what you will not see in the design of my slides, I hope my voice will cover over. All right. So talking through digital organizing for intersectional queer communities. Before I get into that, I think it's a mouthful, even some might argue buzzwords, but I promise I'm going to actually break down each of the words and why I use them, and a couple of tips on how to organize offline and online. But I just wanted to share a little bit about me. So there are many things, many hats that I wear. One is that I'm the founder of Queer Latines. Another is that I'm the writer of Surface Tension. And I'm also a coach. I coach underrepresented founders and creatives, and those that are both founders and creatives, in figuring out structures and systems that actually work for their brains. Because like many other neurodivergent folks, it can be hard to work within the system of capitalism when it just doesn't work for you. And I would argue that it actually doesn't work for most of us. But for Queer Latines, I actually started this by just making an Instagram one day and hosting meetups and staying consistent. I'll share a little bit about our journey here, but it is funny to even share that I'm a founder, because it's been just over 2 years. And I'm like, what do you mean this just started? Because one day I did a thing and here we are. But that said, I wanted to break down how Queer Latinas began. So it began in 2023, the end of the year. It was the fall of 2023, and I was really struggling with finding spaces where both my queer and Latina identities were present and able to be celebrated. I'm Colombian and Puerto Rican from New York, and at the time, I found that many queer spaces were predominantly white and many Latin spaces were predominantly straight or machista and just very patriarchal. And I just felt lost. And so I went to a queer Spanish meetup that I found online. And there were no other Latinos there. It was a very diverse meetup. I actually had a really good time and made two of my close friends from that meetup. But I was surprised that I didn't find the community that I was looking for. And so after that meetup, I decided to make an Instagram and I didn't even post on it. I was just like, all right, I'm going to do this thing and see what happens. And so that was late November, early December of 2023. And then going into 2024, I decided to start the new year hosting my first Spanish practice with a group. Mind you, I made an Instagram, didn't know much of what I was doing. I'm also a non-native Spanish speaker. My parents are bilingual. We spoke English in the house most of the time, and I spoke Spanish with my grandparents. So, in true being comfortable with the uncomfortable, I decided why not host a meetup as I've never hosted one before, and let's make it in Spanish, even though my Spanish wasn't perfect and I felt uncomfortable doing that. But I think that's also a testament to doing things, even if you feel like you're not qualified or if you feel uncomfortable throughout the process. So we hosted our first meetup, I believe it was January 8th, 2024, and 8 people came. And I don't know how people just found the Instagram. I was hoping that the name of the IG itself was really clear. And people showed up. We went in uptown Manhattan. We were in Spanish Harlem. It was an hour and a half commute for me. I'm in Brooklyn. But I was just committed to going to a different neighborhood, a different space. And I felt so excited after that meetup that for the next 6 months, I ended up biking and going around Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, hosting meetups for 3 to 4 weekends of the month. Was that sustainable? Absolutely not. Was I absolutely excited and perhaps in a hyperfixation? Yes. So for 6 months, I did that. And I share 6 months because that leads up into Pride of 2024. And by then, we suddenly had a group chat with 200 people. And it was truly in the blink of an eye for me, even though I think it was natural growth over those 6 months. But I was so focused on just showing up and showing up imperfectly and learning about different experiences. And my goodness, were there so many experiences I learned about? I felt like I had a crash course on organizing without even believing or defining myself as an organizer. And I share that because I think a lot of people feel like there's a barrier to entry when it comes to organizing. And I'm going to share what I've learned to be the different types of organizing and what might feel most true to you. So in 2025, I grew our online presence. I just posted videos of our meetups. I hadn't posted online before, again, being comfortable with the uncomfortable and trying something new. We had a WhatsApp, but I quickly learned a little bit about digital safety, which I'll share more about later in this presentation, and decided to move to a platform where people didn't have their personal numbers publicly available. And then suddenly 400 people joined. And I, again, in the blink of an eye, wasn't looking or counting. I just kept showing up. But in 2025, I started to experience burnout. So instead of hosting meetups every week, I hosted them once or twice a month. And I also tried to figure out how do we host meetups online. And I was able to partner with queer organizations, including ALPFA, which is the Association for Latino Professionals for America, their Pride group in DC, LGBT Tech, WeSwap, which is an awesome startup founded by a queer Latina that is basically trying to bring back bartering. It's a free platform. Highly recommend folks look it up. There's so many thoughts and awesome things I have to say about the founder, Cynthia, but it's a great place to barter skills because every human has hundreds of skills. Even if that skill is opening a door, we all at some point become disabled. And I think it's important to recognize the ways in which we can use our skills to give back to others or even trade and bring back a system that we know has worked for thousands of years. And in 2025, we got asked for more Spanish practice. When I started Queer Latinas, I think I I was in corporate for many years, and so I was very like must have structure. What are the things we're doing? And there was a social pillar, there was a language practice pillar, and then there was a volunteering and giving back to the community pillar. But what I've learned after 2.5 years of organizing is fluidity is more important, because you might have these pillars, but when you have too much structure, it leads to unmet expectations. And as humans, we are not robots. We do not have the same energy each week. And so in 2026, I feel like I finally found the rhythm of sustainability for queer Latinas. So we launched our first national Spanish program. We're actually doing a cohort this summer. I'm so excited about this because one thing I couldn't find, I mentioned earlier, so my pronouns are she, her, ella, but in the 6 months where I was hosting meetups in 2024, I met so many different types of queer Latinos. I had first thought I had this sub intersection that I was struggling to find, but then I learned about so many experiences under that umbrella. What is it like to be an immigrant, to be first generation, to be 3 or 4 generations within the United States and maybe not have a connection to your heritage language? What is it like to experience different relationship structures, to be in an interracial relationship and have kids, but not have that kid surrounded by as many queer folks as we would like? So it was truly just so awesome to open my eyes into the work that I was doing in corporate. I was working in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but being able to practice it outside of the system that corporate is, which I will again share more about. There's a couple of different graphics I'll share that I hope, if you haven't seen it, I hope you get to take away, and feel free to take screenshots as well. But we launched a Spanish program. It includes gender expansive, is the word I like to use, gender expansive language. So when, regardless of your level, whether you're beginner, intermediate, or advanced, a couple of the questions I've been asking myself is, how do we embed they, them pronouns into our language program? And how do we embed queer topics and just queer culture on top of learning a language? And it's just been an absolute delight to do that and to co-create it with our teacher and our team. We also continue hosting monthly meetups in New York. Like I mentioned, definitely burnt myself out in 2024 and in 2025. And I learned that sustainability means it might look more like there are seasons of times where you're hosting meetups rather than having that consistency. But thankfully, we've grown and have a team. And so we're able to show up a bit more consistently now. And we continued working with queer organizations, including Iris House, Field, House of Loire, which is the only queer Latino Spanglish ballroom house in New York. Ask me more about that later. And Hey Fam, which is a form of queer LinkedIn, and definitely something to check out as well if you aren't already on the platform. All right, I'm just going to quickly check. I'm definitely an answer questions as they come. So just feel free to put questions in the chat. But let me go back. Okay, so I mentioned that I was going to define a couple of different words I used in the title of this, which is digital organizing for intersectional queer communities. And I first wanted to define what digital organizing is. So digital organizing is the practice of using online tools and social media to build community power and mobilize people for a cause, campaign, or movement. And I think that this is a lot and very vague at the same time. So I included a couple of examples of what I would define digital organizing as, or forms of organizing that excited me. So this can be organizing for a political candidate. I think that one of the strongest forms of digital organizing we've seen recently in New York was Zohran Mamdani's campaign. I think a lot of other politicians and folks are learning on how to digital organize from that team. There's also Community Sale. I'm not sure how many folks are based in New York, but Community Sale does mutual aid efforts every few months, but similar to Queer Latinas, they're growing a team, and so they're able to do it more consistently. But they recently did a mutual aid fund for people in Palestine, Lebanon, etc. And every few months, they actually switch up which nonprofits and which mutual aid funds they put their funds towards. And this has been an extremely successful and almost completely offline initiative. They have an Instagram, however, speaking with one of their organizers, one of the questions and one thing I think they do super well is, how do we have people sign up without taking too much of their information? Some people are very cautious about digital safety, especially undocumented folks and the like. And so I think community sales is a great place to learn about how to organize and how to get people to show up without having any RSVP form. They just have a calendar event, people add it and they show up. And I think it's the coolest thing. I've included Queer Latinas here as well. So we recently did a Central Park meetup. I am going to share a little bit more about different forms of organizing, but one thing I love is we publicly share how to host meetups or how to bring people together, but there are so many different organizers that come to our meetups, and it is just an absolute delight to see organizers co-create and collaborate together just through going to our meetups and meeting others in community. There's Tompkins Distro that is in Tompkins Square Park in East Village, and they do weekly community mutual aid distribution. They've been doing this for quite some time now, but they use Instagram to gather volunteers, to gather people that are to help cook food and the like. And I think it's just awesome to see how we can use social media for good. And even my take is I actually think we're going to see a huge surge, or we are witnessing a huge surge of organizers, whether you're organizing for activism or you're organizing for community care. We're seeing a surge of intersectional communities, specifically for queer people of color online. That said, May Cohort Curiosity Lab, there is a new program called the School of Softness, and this is a creative cohort for queer people of color. It's completely sliding scale, and I had the privilege of being able to be a part of the pilot. It was one of the most awesome experiences I've had, just trying to figure out what are different systems we can build for ourselves and how do we achieve the things that we're looking to do in community with others. It is truly just such a delight. Definitely recommend looking up School of Softness. And then the last two are Hot Girls Organize. I just took one of their posters for a clothing swap, which we've also done for Queer Latinas as well. But Hot Girls Organize was another incredible organization. I think they were originally, I forget their original name, but they grew so much over the past year. And I think it was really awesome to see how they utilized social media to get more people that are activists, people that want to give back to their local community, and they work with other nonprofits and local mutual aid funds to host events. All right, see, a question came in. All right, I like this question. I'm going to hold off just because I think it might get answered later in this presentation. This is definitely something I've been thinking about. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about, and I think this is something that I wish more organizers discussed, and I'm going to even talk about like what the heck does it mean to be an organizer? Because truthfully, for 2 years of my journey, I did not identify as an organizer. I was raised by a mom who founded a Latino organization. She is extremely service oriented. I've been volunteering since I was a teen, and I had witnessed what it was like for my mom to experience burnout and to receive feedback without the support of others. So I think there was something that it made it really hard for me to self-identify as an organizer until I met other organizers and I learned the different types of organizing. This is not a formal framework, but I also think we don't always need formal frameworks. We sometimes learn through experience, and this is just a simple version of my brain and how I divvy up different types of organizing and how they overlap. So there's activism and community care. Activism is simply fighting for systemic change, and community care is building spaces of belonging. For me, a lot of the work that I did in my job and also through organizing led in and was in the space of building spaces of belonging. But I think that there is much overlap between the two. So activism might be like in the previous examples I shared. It can be protest, policy work, immigrant advocacy, or political campaigns. Community care can look like cultural events, language practice, collective childcare, and communal gatherings. But I think it's also important to see what are the two: mutual aid, food banks, labor unions, and don't sleep on community gardens. I personally remember in times of just tough times where you're like, I don't feel like I'm aligned with what I'm doing. I don't know if the friendships that I have are aligned with the life I want to live. Go to a community garden and you're going to meet some people that have been gardening for years that give their food back to the community, that will give you recipes, they will give you wisdom. Truly just such an underrated resource if you're in a city. All right. So I also included what is intersectionality. A part of me wants to kind of like, do I go into intersectionality or do I want to go into defining the different types of organizing? I think I'll continue with this. And if there's any questions, please let me know. All right, so intersectionality is coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an American civil rights advocate and a legal scholar. I first learned about her in my DEI work in my early 20s. And intersectionality, I think, is often used incorrectly for no reason other than like we learn a term and then we forget the origin of where it came from. So it's about how an individual's overlapping social identities combine to create both unique modes of discrimination and privilege. I think that intersectionality pairs really well with the wheel of power and privilege, which is a separate resource that I used in my full-time work. But I think the reason why intersectionality is important is because it helps us better understand how we have both power, privilege, and experience different forms of discrimination. For example, a lot of my work when I did DEI was actually DEI analytics. So it was figuring out how and where are there forms of pay inequity by race and gender or both, and how do we fix it? And so some of the data that I found in the multiple companies that I worked at is that depending on the department, for example, women in STEM fields, often women and non-binary folks, experienced much more pay inequity in engineering and product compared to folks where there was maybe, or compared to departments where there was a higher representation of women. Across all of corporate, we found that Black women oftentimes experienced a much larger pay gap compared to their white counterparts. And this is where the intersection of multiple parts of your identity might lead to different forms of discrimination. So, for example, for me, a lot of the data that I saw was around Black and Latina identities, but then it also didn't consider skin color. So while I might have marked off being Latina, it didn't acknowledge my own privilege being lighter skinned and how that was treated in the corporate world compared to Black and brown Latinas. So these are all things that the wheel of power and privilege speak to, and Kimberly Crenshaw's analysis on intersectionality also speaks to as well. I would love to hear in the chat, just because there's so many different things I have on the screen right here. I'd love to hear just what is an area or a sliver that maybe you don't consider on the daily or something that you don't think about. For me, that used to be citizenship. But I would love to hear if there's like other forms of power and privilege that maybe you haven't given much thought to. Or maybe I would be curious to hear too if there's something that you think about on the daily. For me, it's neurodiversity. I think about it all the time and all of the structures that don't work for so many people's brains. Hmm. Zoe, I'd love to hear more after about your center. And Joseph, so I'm so glad you mentioned that term because I used to use the term white passing. And I now use the term white presenting because white passing was used in the Jim Crow South to describe mixed Black and white folks that were able to pass and were able to not experience segregation and had family members that wanted them to pass or they themselves wanted to pass. So I mention or use the term white presenting now after understandably using it incorrectly and getting clocked. Of course, happy to help. Age, yes. Oh my gosh. I think I'm so glad you mentioned that, Donna. I especially in organizing noticed how deep ageism is. Oh my goodness. I've shared a reflection in one of my writings about how I want to normalize more age gap friendships, age gap yeah, just connections. There's really just something in our society that I think even globally it's just so deeply etched. Let's see what else. Religion or lack thereof. Ooh, I'm like looking at the wheel if that was included. I think that's an important addition too. Yes, property ownership. Mm-hmm. That I feel like even goes into basically all of the different slivers on the wheel of power and privilege as well. Yes, Emily was disability. Oh yes, ability. Um, that is I ability is interesting because there's both invisible disabilities and then physical disabilities. And I think there's diversity under that as well. And disability justice is definitely way behind, way behind. I've learned, or my take is that based on the time in which specific groups received rights or received, I'm thinking about the Americans with Disabilities Act in the 90s. We see in corporate and we even see in the real world that based on when people received rights is when people start caring. And so when it comes to disability, visibility, disability justice, I think we're still lacking even after the pandemic. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much for the comments here and thank you for being engaged. It really means a lot. All right, so I have a couple of different graphics I shared. We walked through intersectionality and what that is, why it's important, the wheel of power and privilege. And then it also included the characteristics of white supremacy. Don't worry, I want to say it's going to be hope core at the end of this presentation. I know we're getting right into power, privilege, like why is this connected to digital organizing? But I actually, despite working in DEI for almost 8 years, it wasn't until I started organizing where I realized how deep white supremacy is in our systems and structures. One thing I've learned through organizing is that you get a crash course on conflict resolution. I'm very grateful. I did not grow up in a conflict avoidant household. We address conflict head on. But I think when you are building something that is greater than you, when you're building something for a larger community, inevitably there's going to be conflict. And so I think it's important to distinguish between what is constructive feedback to action on versus where do I need help? If someone's giving me feedback, can they provide me their help? But instead of walking through all of the different characteristics of white supremacy, I would love if everyone could put in the chat, and I know we don't have a definition right here, it's pretty high level. One thing that they think is just embedded in either their work environment, in their life, something that I'm like, oh man, I really have to unlearn this, or this is going to take some time to sit with. For me, progress is bigger. I don't know what it is that been so hard to unlearn this idea that you don't need to grow in order to have progress. And sometimes even sustaining something is considered progress. Oh, I feel like that's a more of a stereotype that is totally rooted in white supremacy, Michael. There are so many. I recently shared a reflection basically around the tenets of white supremacy, and it's just so wild to see how much of it is who created a story for other people and why has this become normalized. Levi's sense of urgency. That one, yeah, I was actually even running late to this. I was behind on my commute, and I was fighting between this like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have time to prepare before the presentation, and also whether I'm stressed or not, the work is going to get done. So why am I going to be stressed about it? Internalized capitalism is definitely a battle. And yes, Donna, there is no one right way. That one, I think, especially in work environments, think about how many times there are just multiple iterations of, okay, what's the best way? What's the best way? And I think that question, why does it have to be the best way? Does the best way mean it's the most human? I think especially in the age of AI, there's a lot of desire for hyper productivity and efficiency. Let's see. Oh, quantity over quality. Oh, I got you. That is about mass production. It's like we need to produce as much as possible because we can make as much as possible rather than thinking about. I think about so I'm Colombian and Puerto Rican, but my family's in Bogota. And I'm very grateful that there was a lot of teaching about indigenous tribes in Colombia. And one thing my family tries to do is meet indigenous tribes and see how do we support somebody who is a craftsman, that is an artisan, that it took time, whether it was months or hours, to create something rather than to mass produce it in a factory just for the benefit of making more money. Denying remote work limits you to only folks with privilege to live nearby or commute. That part. I see right to comfort. The rest of it is at the expense of literally everyone. Yes, yes. I think right to comfort is probably one of the bigger ones where it's hard for us to address, like, what does that mean? Or what do I need to live a life of discomfort? But I think it is, just like you said, Joseph, at the expense of literally everyone and everything else. All right, thank you so much for engaging, everyone. It really means a lot. So the other question I had here, that if I were to remake this, I would probably have put it earlier on, is what the heck does it mean to be an organizer? But I think it was important to share just a couple of the structures that I think about when it comes to organizing and what I used to think about when it came to DEI work. And I wanted to actually kind of co-create this with everyone here. So I had put a couple of bullets of what I think it means to be an organizer, but I'd love to also just edit while we're live. I'm going to say these out loud, but I would love if you can share in the chat while I'm answering, just what does it mean to be an organizer to you? There's truly no wrong answer. And while people are doing that, I will share a couple of the things that I underlined or just based on my own experience. An organizer is someone who sees a need in their community and takes action. Heavy on the takes action part, because I'm sure most of us have experienced, there are a lot of people that have a lot of feedback about how there isn't XYZ space. I know even before I created Queer Latinas, there was so much of like, there's no space for queer Latinos. And I don't know if it's the eldest daughter in me, the Virgo in me, the New Yorker in me. I was like, all right, it doesn't exist, so I'm just going to make it. And it's someone who builds power with others, not over them. I think that power hoarding is also a characteristic of white supremacy. It is someone who is a builder of relationships. And if I could bold this, accountability. There are a few accountability structures I built early on when making Queer Latinas, not proactively. I built it because I view it as a blessing in disguise, but I was 3 months into my organizing journey and I didn't even realize it was organizing at the time, and had experienced something that made me realize, oh, we need a code of conduct. Because being a part of this community, being queer and being Latino doesn't mean that everybody is open-minded. It doesn't mean people are curious. And I want to make sure that people come into these spaces with curiosity and kindness to others that maybe live a different life than them. It's someone who shows up consistently, even when it's small. That is kind of a reminder to myself. There have been months where I just couldn't show up in organizing, and I had to figure out what was most sustainable for me. And also, how can I rely on others and trust them to run something where maybe I actually don't have a helping hand? We hosted our first book club last December, which was such a treat. It was called Debí leer más libros, which was a take on Bad Bunny's album Debí tirar más fotos. And it was also our first COVID conscious event. So I had a crash course on disability justice, on hosting both an in-person or organizing both offline and online around the book club. And we were lucky enough to meet with the author of Puerto Rico, A National History, who granted us an hour of his time just to ask questions for the group. And then lastly, I wrote, you create spaces where people feel less alone. I think that goes more into the community care version of organizing. So I do want to clarify for those that are more on the activist side of organizing, this list might look a little bit different to you. All right, Donna wrote, someone who can be flexible to meet the moment without losing sight of the original idea. Ooh, I love that. I think having what's the core value or what's your core mission and how can you flexibly create something around that mission. I think creating a mission is truly so important in gathering people that have that shared mission and also getting to be creative in how you deliver on it. Joseph wrote, a bridge between people. Zoe, someone who connects community to resources either through information or by enhancing access. Yes, 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 yes. I'm going to add these to the presentation. So thank you so much to everyone for co-creating this. And what I love too is that to everyone, this is going to look different. There's no one right way. Oh, and what does that go back to? Boom. The characteristics of white supremacy. Organizing has to go against it. It is Organizing is an act against white supremacy. When you go against either or thinking, when you go against one right way, there can be presentations where somebody might have a completely different definition of what it means to be an organizer. But I think when you have just an understanding of what you do not want to be, that is a start. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to go back into sharing. All right, this is where a part of my own brain shows up, and also why I personally love organizing. We are in a loneliness epidemic. We've been talking about this for years, and I think what makes me sad is we just because we stop talking about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think remote work adds to this as somebody who remote worked for many years. People having access to social media, using more social media, feeling connected online, but not feeling connected offline. One of my big questions, especially in starting Queer Latinas in New York, a city where there is an abundance of queer Latinos, was how do I create spaces of belonging, both virtual and in person, especially for queer Latinos that maybe don't have the representation they're looking for in their local communities. And I quickly realized outside of New York, my goodness, there have been people all across the US, in London, in South America that have joined our community. And it is just the biggest surprise in both a grief filled and heartwarming way. But through organizing, and I just did a quick time check, I'm going to zoom through so we have time for questions. I created this just on a whim. I don't know. I'm full of random structures. Sometimes I deliver on them, sometimes I don't, but I am always kind to myself, whether I do it or not. I learned through the people that I met that there were different creative types, and so many people are creative. And honestly, most of us are creative, but we are so bogged down by working 40 plus hours a week that all we want to do is unwind. And for those that maybe had a break from work, took medical leave, whatever it may be, we quickly realize when we have that time back, oh my gosh, there's all of these ideas. And when you expand what creativity looks like, maybe you're a relationship artist, maybe you are an artist with written of the written word or spoken word. There is no one way to be a creative, but one thing I encourage you to do, in addition to like reflecting on organizing, is reflecting on how can I be creative with what it means to be creative, and how can I embrace that in my life. So I won't get too into details with this, but I wrote down different archetypes that I saw. There were builders, dreamers, doers, connectors, makers, and disruptors. A disruptor is kind of like a multi hyphenate of the ones above. They're the ones that are doing a lot, and there is a 99% chance they are going to be burnt out. Builders oftentimes and connectors are where we see organizers. And now that I've built a stronger community of organizers in New York, I just love seeing which archetype they fall into and how that influences the work that they do. There isn't one right way to be. Not everyone falls into these archetypes, but it's just been something I've loved to reflect on, and why I enjoy organizing so much. I also love organizing because I just love connecting people. These are some of many photos. We've hosted over 50 meetups, which is like hilarious to say as someone who did it for so long. And I'm like, why or how did I even do that? But now we have so many more team members that are supporting. This summer bucket list was from 2024, and I just put a piece of paper in one of our meetups or a large poster board and asked people what they wanted to do. And this is actually my friend Andy with the pink hair. Their birthday is today. After this presentation, I'm going to celebrate them. But this is us at Ginger's, which is a lesbian bar in Park Slope in Brooklyn. And we table there each year just to share a little bit more about queer Latinas. Awesome. All right. Just going to continue through. I see we have some more folks in the chat. So I included a couple of tips on how to organize online and how to organize offline. So with organizing online, I want to keep it super simple. Like I mentioned, there isn't one right way. And I want you to leave with this knowing there isn't going to be a singular way to do something. And if there's any way to do it imperfectly. And when you go with an open heart and you come with curiosity, people will trust you more, because that ego has to be low. But I included a photo of our first meetup. I actually couldn't find it on my camera roll or anything, but it was on Instagram archives. This was the first meetup I hosted, the one I mentioned that was that Spanish practice in Spanish Harlem. But with organizing online, my suggestions are start with one platform. Consistency will always beat perfection. You do not have to show up with the prettiest graphics. I made this on Canva. I had never used Canva beforehand, but you don't have to show up with the prettiest graphics. You don't have to show up having everything solved. You are going to meet other people, whether they are community builders, event hosts, or organizers that maybe seem like they know how to story tell on social media more. But that is a skill that I've truly learned over 2.5 years. Importantly, if you are organizing offline and what you are organizing about is sensitive, keep sensitive conversations offline. Use apps like Signal to have conversations, maybe even grow an online group on Signal, and listen more than you broadcast. I, even doing presentations like this, kind of caused me discomfort because I'm like, dang, like I'm really spending this whole time talking. That's so wild. I'm so used to having conversations and hearing from others, which is why I really do, again, appreciate so much engagement in the chat. With organizing online, I do want to share just a few digital safety tips. Like I mentioned, please use encrypted apps for organizer communication like Signal. Again, if you have something that's more sensitive, despite having such a large presence online with Queer Latinas, that has truly grown like beyond what I would have ever imagined when I started it. I will say a lot of the conversations and events we host are not posted online. That's been interesting when people join for the first time and they're like, I didn't hear about the Spanish program, or I didn't hear about this Spanish practice or this event with other organizers. And I'm like, we don't post that on Instagram. Going into data privacy and consent, if you are collecting data, just know what you're collecting and why. I mentioned this earlier on, but do protect against harassment by creating guidelines and accountability structures. It really makes a difference when you start a conversation going through the guidelines of it, or if you start a meetup going through the guidelines. I've definitely had to like have some tough conversations when people say something that is just unkind towards others, and it's not a judgment of their character, but rather like we are all an amalgamation of the environments that we grew up in and the media that we consumed, and it is not easy undoing that. It's lifelong. And then lastly, digital hygiene basics. If you do run any social media, please have two-factor authentication, account backups, and offline conversations. I have seen other organizers unfortunately lose their pages due to this. That's also why I think it's important to have sensitive conversations online, offline, because unfortunately, a lot of platforms have a lot of censorship. All right. And then let's get into how to organize offline. This is just more photos. I have so many photos on my phone. Organizing offline can be super simple, and it should be as accessible as possible. So that can look like park hangs, social events, workshops and skill shares, celebrations and rituals, as well as activism and advocacy. So some of the photos we have here, we have our most recent park hang in the bottom at Central Park. It took me 2.5 years, not gonna lie, but I finally figured out how to have people easily find us in the park. And you would think giving coordinates works, but no, you just have to be near an entrance and have a massive flag, and that will work. In the top left here, we had one of our meetups. It was actually a free event in Brooklyn. And we're trying to remember the word in Spanish, but we basically created mystical figures with an indigenous artist, and that was a very sweet, wholesome event. Despite the community being so large, I do love and miss the moments where we just had 4 to 6 people show up. I will also say sometimes people don't show up at all. And all that is information on how to organize next time. It does not mean that it was a mistake or that this thing isn't working. There were multiple meetups in that first 6 months I hosted where nobody showed up. And that was because I was deep in Queens. I was deep somewhere and people just weren't living nearby. And then this photo in the top right's most recent. This winter, or not most recent, that was the park one, but we went to Jackson Heights Public Library to give out coffee to the community and also to give out whistles and Know Your Rights cards in both English and Spanish. And so we just went across Roosevelt Ave and 74th, which are just two large streets in Queens, giving out whistles so people could notify when ICE is in the neighborhood. All right. I do want to have time for questions, but the last thing I have is just a couple of tips. So, a few organizing tips, whether you are organizing from the perspective of a nonprofit, if you're organizing like an employee resource group within a corporation, or if you're organizing for yourself, you're trying to start something for the first time. The first thing I want to start with is actually the second bullet. Organizing is a crash course in conflict resolution. And you will realize that people will give you constructive feedback, but not everyone will give you help. And so when people give constructive feedback, it's really important to ask for help because their offering or lack of offering tells you enough. When you start, please start small, build relationships first. When Queer Latinas started, it took us 6 months of hosting meetups and we had just grown to 1,000 followers. And I was like, wow, like that's so cool. I can't believe that many people joined. And then the 2 months subsequent, we grew from 1,000 to 20,000. And I was like, okay, this is kind of like getting serious and I'm just one human. What's going on? But I realized that in starting small and staying consistent, there was a level of trust built that I wasn't even aware of. There was a level of staying open and honest and having difficult conversations and showing up again and again that led to compounding effects where now when I ask people how they heard of the group, most of it is through word of mouth. And that is beyond me because I'm like, oh, I started this thing through social media, but if people felt safe and they came back, they would bring more people. And one thing I will add outside of celebrating small wins, which truly, like when the big wins happen, they go above your head. You are so like in logistics mode, you don't even think about those wins. Ay, se me fue. I had the thing, small wins, conflict resolution. It'll come back to me, but it was an important one. Mm, mm. It's all good. It'll probably come back in the Q&A. But these are just a couple of tips. I think one I would add is really to just rely on others. You can only do so much alone. And if we go back to those characteristics of white supremacy, individualism is one of them. I really do love looking back at that framework because it tells us so much about the society we grew up in regardless of your race, your gender, the region in the United States you grew up in, if you grew up in the United States, all of these characteristics are things that we have been born into or raised into, and it takes a lifetime to unlearn them. So for me, that looks like, you know what, I can't do this alone. And that has helped so much in the growth of queer Latinas and just also my own sanity. So awesome. Okay. And so before we get into the Q&A, the last thing I wanted to show is a little graphic I found online. I wish there were more graphics that showed the hopeful side of how do you disrupt white supremacy culture. But to compare this with the other graphic I had showed, this is what I look at and what I think about when building Queer Latinas and scaling something that at some point is going to be beyond me, meaning my goal is to have this organization exist for generations to come without me having to be a part of it. There's a lot of grief I hold in that because I'm like, oh my gosh, like look at this tender thing I made. But in order for this to do good, it has to exist beyond me. Go slow in order to grow is truly and has been what queer Latinas and many other community organizations have done and why some have grown for years to come versus others that experienced a massive amount of growth and then burnt out. I mentioned that queer Latinas grew basically 20 times in the span of 2 months. That does not work with go slow in order to grow, but in speaking with my mentor and other peers in my life, what I decided to do was, although there was the growth and the interest, how I'm showing up, the frequency in which we are hosting events, the things we do online, that is going to stay limited. I had a bottleneck so that I was able to grow a team despite all of the growth we had online. Also, very obvious, but also needs to still be said, growth on social media does not indicate growth of people showing up to events. Sometimes people like to follow something because they morally align with it. But I've learned in the experience with Queer Latinas and our free events, there are lots more people that show up now. A park hang that maybe was once 10 people is now 100 people. But I really took my time in taking a step back so that we could grow a little bit slower. Awesome. So there's so many different parts of this slide where I could talk more through. But I do want to leave some time for Q&A, and also just to catch up on the chat. So thank you so much for your time and for your patience while I figured out my Zoom chaos. But I would love to hear questions in the chat. And I also saw there was a Q&A question that came through. So I'm just going to take a quick water break while everybody puts any questions or comments in the chat.
Thank you so much for that, Alyssa. I feel like that was the perfect way to wrap up the day, really showing kind of the ways that the activities that we do online and the spaces that we build translate to very real in-person spaces and communities and relationships and everything. So that was so fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So while we're waiting for people to drop their questions in the Q&A or in the chats, I'm going to go ahead and read the Q&A question that we have here. So Joseph asked, what do you think is the biggest challenge in creating intersectional coalitions that solve local or even national problems?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the issues has been showing up consistently. Um, Local and national problems can be one and the same. I remember a year into Queer Latinas, we actually tried to expand to California, Miami, Jersey, and New York at once. I don't know what I was thinking, but there was interest from people, from organizers in those areas, and they wanted to help out. And I'm going to say the struggle of building spaces of belonging. I know that's like a compared to so many other issues we experience within the community. We viewed that as step one in order to address food insecurity, in order to address homophobia in the workplace, which we have a lot of lawyers in our community, which has been so awesome. Oh my gosh, they've done so much good work. But I think consistently showing up is really hard in the age of just digital everything. When you have an event online, you are competing with so many other events, you are competing with so many other organizations. And so what I've done, and this is my take that is like I'm working through it out loud. It's even scary to say out loud is um, I'm trying to build an organization where organizers get compensated. And so we have no one's turned away due to lack of funds, but with our small team, folks are compensated for the time that they give in. And I have found that one, I think organizers deserve to be compensated, and two, it helps them show up more. So that's been something interesting is seeing how consistent can people be when they have their own lives. We're still living under capitalism. People need to make money. And also asking the community based on the funds that you can give. We have a sliding scale. We have for students and low income folks, we have for folks that can give more. But for anyone, even if you can't give, you're still going to be a part and be able to join our online community. The reason why I'm scared to say that out loud is because I haven't been able to see other organizers do the same. A lot of organizers talk about burnout. A lot of organizers have a difficult relationship with money. A lot of organizers, similar to me, came from financially insecure backgrounds and feel horrible being like, do I put a dollar amount to this? And at the same time, we're seeing the term community be coined as something to capitalize on. So I'm trying to live the question of how do we make this more sustainable so that we can address systemic issues both locally and nationally.
Yeah, I think that's super important, especially thinking about like who has access to organizing and stuff where people are not being put in positions necessarily where they have to maybe prioritize other like paid work over the organizing work that they're really passionate about because it's able to provide that support to them. So that's really amazing. And also that it's funded by the community. So it's still,
It
beholden to the
also
community
it
interest.
it if I may, it allows me I can say what I want. I said, look, we don't have to worry about corporate funding. It's awesome. Like I really want to see more organizations do that. I think having worked in corporate, I knew what it was like to have to bite my tongue. And I'm not saying to say like anything crazy, but it's just so beautiful. Like, I want to see more organizers do this, but I'm currently living that question. And I think in a year's time, we'll be able to be like, look, this is how you make it sustainable. This is how you build a team. When you have trust and consistency at the core, the community will give back to you.
That'll be the presentation we have you give at next year's.
Yes, I hope so. Oh, but thank you for letting me share. I think sometimes you need to say that out loud to even when you're afraid.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions for Alyssa before we wrap up today? Awesome. Well, we will leave it there. Thank you so much, Alyssa. It's always such a pleasure having the opportunity to hear from you. That was such a wonderful presentation. So we really appreciate your time and
Thank
your
you.
insight. I have a few notes before we wrap up the summit today. So thank you so much, everyone who attended, everyone who checked out the expo. The expo, as we mentioned, is going to be open for another hour. So go ahead and check out the amazing organizations that we have in there. Queer Latinas has a booth in there, so you can go learn more about the work that they're doing there and maybe how to get plugged in, as well as many other amazing community organizations. We also have a few other announcements. So in the expo, you'll also see that we have a booth for our Paths podcast. Alyssa's episode actually came out this month as well. It's amazing if you want to go hear more of her experience kind of with queer Latinas and also navigating the DEI and tech space. I highly recommend checking out that episode. And we also have a whole other season of episodes from amazing LGBTQ STEAM professionals that you can check out with our podcast. We also have information about our Power On program. If any of you were with us this morning, we talked about our Power On grants, so you can learn more about Power On. And also you can visit poweronlgbt.org if you're interested in learning more. We can also share more information about our Paths program, which is our program that's dedicated to building space for LGBTQ professionals in STEAM. You can learn more at pathslgbtq.org or visit the expo, and you can find that information there. We also have a really exciting announcement. So we are launching our Power On Power Up Resource Hub, which is a resource library for LGBTQ individuals on all things online safety, digital skills. So I'm actually going to give you all a sneak peek of what that looks like. But that is officially launched, and we're so excited to share this with you. There we go. So with our Power Up Resource Hub, you can come in here and you can hear from LGBTQ experts and folks who are knowledgeable in these fields around topics of online safety, cyber safety for LGBTQ centers, some digital foundations for digital skills for workforce development, and then device access and affordable connectivity. So we have a whole huge library of resources in here that are in different media formats that you can download and share with your center or your clients, or check out some of the videos that we have in there as well. We also have some tips from Alyssa in the library, so go ahead and check those out as well. But we're really excited to share that, and I will go ahead and drop the link for our Power Up Resource Hub here. But again, you can also, oh, Samantha's already got it. You can also visit our booth in the expo to learn more about that. We have a lot of printable resources there as well. And for any of you that saw our session this morning on the guidebook, our guidebook is also out now. So our Navigating Cyber Safety guidebook is now out. If you ordered a copy, you will be receiving it soon. If you're interested in ordering a copy, you can do that now. And we have physical and digital copies available. And so our guidebook goes into online safety best practices for LGBTQ serving organizations. And if your center is interested in learning more, we're happy to come and do some trainings and things like that as well. We will have a webinar series coming out starting soon, so make sure to get on our mailing list if you're interested in learning more about that. And finally, we will be sending out recordings for all of the sessions that we had today. So if you were registered, you'll receive links to those as well as the presentations that we had. And finally, we will have a end of session survey. So you'll receive the survey for this session and then also for the full summit. So we really would appreciate it if you take the time to just fill that out, give us some feedback. We really appreciate it. But thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you to everyone who participated in the chat. This was such a lively and interesting conversation, and for everyone who was here today. And we hope to see you next time, and maybe we'll catch some of you in the expo. Thank you so much.
Thank you.